Good evening, councillors, officers, anyone else who I should mention, cabinet members. Also, I know they qualify as councillors, but I thought I should give them a special mention. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for the 3rd of October 2023. Please be advised that this is a public meeting and it's being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Item 1, do we have any declarations of interest? No. Number 2, apologies for absence and substitutes.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Bullman, Councillor Newstead, Councillor Ward and Councillor Yosefian. And their substitutes are Councillor Nurden, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Orber and Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. I hope those members who have not been to ONS this year will enjoy themselves, if it's possible, an Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. We have item 3, minutes of Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held 12th of September, which we can see the minutes there. I would just note the addendum at the very end, because I know there was a point raised at the last meeting about certain, a member would like certain comments that he made during the meeting to have been noted. I hope that that now satisfies that member with the mention of his particular, or those particular points raised, which will be added to the record. Is everyone happy to accept them as a true and proper record of the meeting? Wow, okay. Councillor Empsall has indicated yes, and as we know that he's my go-to man for accuracy of the minutes. And I know he's good at many other things as well. Just don't want to trick. I know he's not a one-trick pony, but there we go. We move on to item 4, Chairman's announcements. I have no specific announcements to make relating to anything that's happened in the past, or relating to nothing. No one has contacted me with anything specific. Public speaking, item 5.
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Right, okay. We move straight on to item number 6, the member ward grant review following audit recommendations. And that is Dan Goodwin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening all. So, you've had the paper already. This is...
Can I just say, do you want to have a thing passed back to you so you can use your...
Yeah, but it's not... Oh, we're in. We're in. Can you all hear me now? Brilliant, thank you. So this is an annual report around the member ward grant. As part of the governance and guidance for the member ward grant, we're required to come to overview and scrutiny once a year, just to summarise the previous year's grant review. This year we've also included the response from audit recommendations after some of the community services were audited last year and the recommendations within that. I'm sure you'll have seen this. Each member, this is talking about last year's grant, was allocated £500 to spend within their community on purposes that they see would be of benefit to their residents. We had, I think it was 86%, I should have the figure right in front of me really, £20,213.69 was spent from last year across 38 projects. 35 of the 47 members spent their full allocation. The underspend was returned savings, and all of the member ward grants applied met the criteria and ground rules. There is a link within the paper so you can see specific ones, and Overview and Scrutiny has the ability to request any particular member reports to them on any of their grants that they wish to provide at the time. Within the audit, there were a few recommendations made. There were concerns around ensuring that the funding is allocated effectively and that we can efficiently show that it's been done diligently. So there were 3 recommendations that related to the member ward grants. One of them was a mechanism be agreed and implemented for documenting verification of spend for member ward grants and to ensure those projects are being presented to overview and scrutiny as outlined within the rules. A second, a process to be developed to reallocate unused grant funding to projects approved during the current financial year. And third, Member Ward Grants Programme rules to be reviewed to clarify the definition of an activity and eligibility criteria for receipt of funding in consecutive years. We looked at those recommendations and we proposed some actions accordingly. In terms of the member ward grants in general, encourage members to allocate their ward grant before the 1st of March to ensure there is no underspend. To address the audit recommendations, we recommend, or we suggest, officers suggest that member ward ground rules could be amended to request that members visit the funded project or make contact with the funded project between 6 and 12 months after the award to, if appropriate, present with a funded by Broadland District Council material, but generally check in and see how the project is going. Are they delivering what we were hoping to, that the member is hoping to be delivered? Get a bit of feedback, generally kind of touch base within the community group or organisation. This is a useful promotional piece of PR for both the organisation and the council and the councillor themselves. If they have any concerns, they can come back to the team and officers will work with them to try and work through those. But in general, it's also really good community. So if we can get pictures, videos, that kind of thing, it's a good opportunity to celebrate the member ward grant and the money going forwards. And it just ensures that we have checked back in, made sure that things are going forwards. For the second recommendation around unused funding, officers challenge that slightly in the sense that we ask member ward grants to be funded by the 1st of March. That gives 1 month to turn around any underspend, which is not a lot of time. Equally, projects that have been funded within that year have often come in for a very specific set of money and may not need extra cash, so it may not be the most prudent use of public funding to offer them further sums if it's not necessary. Instead, we've proposed that any underspend from that is pushed forward into the new community grant scheme for the following year, so they would bolster that grant and still ensure that the money does go to community use. The third recommendation around adjusting the ground rules, we have made some amendments and they are in the appendices in Appendix B. It's just some gentle wording effectively just to clarify the differences and clear up some detail. That summarises everything within it. So I'd like to open up for questions, if there are any.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got anything to say? Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dan. Great work you guys do in offering us support for when we put the grants in. As you know, I asked plenty of questions on them. Can you just remind me, sorry, what's the time limit that the grant needs to be spent by the organisation or group once it's awarded, sorry?
Within the ground rules, it says within 12 months following the receipt. There is potential to amend that. So if it's a larger project that would take time, it can be started as long as the money begins to be spent within the 12 months. If it's going to take a bit longer to go through it, all that can be done.
Councillor Wymar.
Thank you very much. I just wondered, there's a few things I wanted to question. First of all, if someone gives a grant in the final year before an election and they don't win a seat, who will follow up? Because it won't be the member, because they may not be around. And also, I just wondered about the cost of the materials we're looking to provide. I mean, is it like a little plaque, or, I mean, you know, is it very costly? Because obviously it's all very well you having a picture, but, you know, if you're talking about materials that go alongside that, what will that be, and will there be a cost? Well, what not will there be? There will be a cost, obviously. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the elected member, if there is an election, the member is no longer the elected, officers would pick it up. It would be the only fair way to do that, really. In terms of materials, the reason it says materials and is left deliberately vague, because a lot of these grants are quite small sums, and it wouldn't be appropriate to cast a plaque or something similar. Equally, if it's a small group or something, there may not be anywhere to display it. So it's about using the most appropriate thing. If it is a group that has a social media presence, they could have some logos made. So we can have some materials produced that can be used to put on their social media pages. They could have posters. So rather than go down expensive giving plaques or pictures or posters to stick on, we can do this in the most cost-effective manner is the plan.
Councillor Nerden.
Thank you, Chairman. It says here in 2.2 of the rules that members are requested. And that seems to me to be a little bit of a woolly thing. You can be requested, but you've got no responsibility to actually do that. You don't have to. And that's, I have a little concern about that, as it's not mandatory. So members are requested to do that, but it's not, if you don't, then there's no sanction. So I have a little concern about that. If you can just give me a little bit of with wording that would reassure me that it is what we've got to do rather than what is being requested of us to do.
I mean, ultimately, members aren't in a position to mandate elected members to do anything. We do request you. We would hope that you would want to, because it is ultimately in your interest as well. It is, you're able to promote that you have spent some of the ward allocation that you have in your community on services that you're supporting. So it's useful for you for future campaigns and the similar, and shows that you are working with your community group. So we kind of hope that members would be interested in doing so. We can't force it. I don't think we're in a position to be able to, but we would certainly encourage strongly and would work to do so. So we would be in fairly regular contact to do that. But I don't think that we have the mandate to be able to do anything more than that, unfortunately.
If I may, thank you. So why put it in the rules? Rather have it as a guidance. That is what you would like members to do. But because it's in the rules, that's where my concern is. Because the rules, we have to stick to the rules. When I make an application for spending some of my grant money, and the fact is I've spent it all already, that's where, as far as I'm concerned, I can go and ask them, would you like me to pose for a photograph to show that it was funded by Broadland? That's something that I've always regarded as something like well, I can do that if I want to do it, because I think it could show the community that I'm involved. But to put it in the rules, that's where I have a little bit of an issue, that it is guidance. It's a good idea to have that, but it shouldn't be in the rules. It should be just as guidance. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nerden. I mean, it is very much to respond to the audit recommendations. There was concern within the audit that there wasn't enough response on member ward grant payments and checking whether those payments were being made effectively and being assessed, which is why there was a recommendation that the rules or the guidance would be increased within the grant rules, which are endorsed by members ultimately. So that's why we've placed them in there and within the ground rules, to encourage that, to show that there is due governance and due diligence taken by those members. But as I say, we're not in a position to be able to force that. So we encourage it to go in the rules, and if endorsed, then that would be, members would have agreed to that process.
Does anybody else have any further questions they'd like to ask? Councillor Amy.
Thank you. It says that in page 18 of the risk report, recommendation 4, it says 4 recipients receive funding in all 3 years when the rule limit was 2 years. I just wondered, were any of those in Broadland?
I'd have to check, to be honest. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and have a look. I think, if I recall correctly, when we looked back at that, it was around separate measures. The one that is illustrated there, the CCTV cameras, I know is definitely South Norfolk. But I'd have to check on the other one.
If no one else has got any further questions, I'll put this to the vote. I would just say, though, before that, one little comment. I actually think checking in, following up is a good idea in principle. I think that the greatest likelihood of us visiting, and I know lots of us are all heavily involved in our communities, and that's my many office I'm elected. But as a cautionary note, when my father was councillor for Horsford, which I now represent, many years ago, he had this habit of turning up to talk to an organisation and coming back having been elected to its board or as a volunteer. And my mum used to say, "Oh, not another thing, John." So when you go, you may have to be very precise and explain that you've got a very limited amount of time, even though these organisations are in many cases incredibly valuable to our communities and provide a brilliant service. So that's my only guideline. I have to visit and say I can't take anything else on. But if we are putting this to the vote, the proposals are the committee to, so make sure I'm reading the right part, the recommendations, the committee to comment on the current spend against the ground rules, and the committee to endorse any of the amendments to the member ward grant proposed in section 4 and recommend to officers. We're happy with that as it written. All those in favour? All those, sorry. I'm assuming you can count instantly, James, sorry.
14.
All those against?
And that's carried, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation, and thank you for your support recently with helping me sort out my member ward grant, which you should have received now. Cabinet reports we move on to at this point. Item number 7, the medium-term financial position and reserves update. I would just note to members this is an update and really useful. It gives us a bit of a head start in thinking of things that we might want to be asking about when I know Rodney is doing a review in, get my dates right, 3 weeks today. Is it that quick? Yes. And so it hopefully gets not I'm going to prevent people asking any questions, but obviously this is a sort of extra bonus for us ahead of all the other steps that are coming. So, Rodney. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So we're very much at the start of the process to set next year's budget, the 24-25 budget for this council. So it's just a good practice, a good idea, just at the start of this process to look at where we are, what does our medium-term financial strategy look like, and what level of reserves have we got, what sort of money have we got in the reserves for future events. So very much this report is just setting this information out. The first thing is very much the graph in paragraph 1.2, where you can see our need to spend, which is our blue line, going up quite significantly year on year. And that's very much going up with inflationary pressures. And obviously at the moment, we've got high levels of inflation. So we're seeing particular pressures in the short term. Our ability to fund our desire to spend money is very much constrained by government funding and also our ability to put up council tax. And you'll see actually our ability to fund our requirements goes up at a slower rate than actually probably our need to fund is. And this is common in many authorities. Most authorities are seeing this gap between the desire to spend and actually their ability to fund, which makes it's a difficult budget setting round and a difficult thing. You have to continue to look at how do we make our spend more efficient, how do we grow income, and what do we do to try and reduce that funding gap. Really want to point out that actually this graph has actually got worse since we reported it last, which was back in February Cabinet before we set the budget last time. And that's very much because we're seeing an increase in inflationary pressures. When we looked at it last in February, we were very much assuming that inflation was going to reduce. It hasn't reduced as quickly as we expected, and therefore we're seeing that funding gap for next year being higher than what we were reporting back in February of this year. So this report also sets out what reserves the council has. There's two types of reserves, usable and unusable. As the name suggests, the unusable ones are ones you can't use to actually support council tax or spend. So ones you want to be looking at is your usable reserves. And the table at 2.2 very much sets out what the council's usable reserves were as at the 31st of March 2023. So overall you can see we had £23 million worth of reserves. And actually, as a starting position, that's robust. Actually, it's a lot better than many authorities, so we're in a good starting position. The one I'd like to point out particularly is the general fund reserve, and that's the one we can use for anything. A lot of the other ones are earmarked for specific purposes. So although we're in a good starting position, this is where the however comes in that however, of our earmarked reserves, we've already said we're going to use an awful lot of these to fund our capital programme in the future. Not only are we going to be using our earmarked reserves, but back in February we said actually we're going to use some of our general reserves as well to fund that capital programme. So when you look at it, you're saying our general reserve is 5.5 million, but our current plans were suggesting we're going to use 5.5 million of our general reserves actually to fund the existing capital programme. So this is very much where we're highlighting in this report. We'll need to do something, the Cabinet and the portfolio holder very much start looking at this to say actually what are we going to do to look at our capital programme to make sure that our capital programme doesn't use all our reserves going forward. So this is something that we'll be working on over the next few months. But it's useful to put this into context because really you might sit there going, well, £15 million worth of £23 million of reserves, we're in a great financial position. But when you look at our current spending plans, you already see we're going to be using a lot of those, so we haven't got much headroom, if any, to do anything else. So we're going to have to look at reprioritising some of our plans in order to make sure what we're going to propose is actually affordable going forward. And I'm sure this is something that the Cabinet will be taking a keen interest over on in the next couple of months. And the other section in this report is very much the new metrics that have been published by OFLOG, the Office for Local Government. So these are very much there for your information. When you look at the indicators, actually Broadland comes across well. Our metrics are in line with or better than most other local authorities. So again, our starting position is good, but it comes with that caveat. Actually, we've got a difficult few years ahead of us. But very much this report is just to start setting the scene ready for that budget process, which will be going on over the next few months and will actually culminate in the Cabinet reports in February and Council in February to set next year's budget. And I'll pause there for questions.
Thank you, Rodney. Councillor Karimi Gouvernail.
Thank you, Chair. I'm slightly worried, looking at these predictions, that the Cabinet approved in February to use the general reserves, which, as it says here, should provide a buffer. And that means we will have no minimum recommendation reserves that the government is saying, like 1.4 million. If we're going to use everything, we are going to really be using everything, aren't we? We're going to be bankrupt. Do you agree?
So it's acceptable to actually run down your reserves. Actually, a lot of people would argue that actually it's good practice. You shouldn't be sitting on more reserves than you need. But I agree, we need to maintain that minimum buffer in our general fund reserves. And that's why I think this report is clearly stating we need to be looking at our current programmes and reviewing them to make sure they are affordable in the short and medium term.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't very prudent, I think, for the decision in February. Thank you.
Councillor Emsall.
Just on page 21, the business rates, we've got for the few years moving forward that there's no change on the business rates. With the hopeful expansion of, our, well, for instance, obviously the Broadland Business Park and things like that, I'm looking at the fact that the business rates would be going up that we would be getting in. I don't know if that's something which it is something where we will be encouraging business, therefore there will be more money coming in.
Yes, I would agree. That is an area there is potential scope for increased income from business rates. The one caveat with that is the government is and been talking for a number of years about reviewing the business rates mechanism with potential changes on the horizon. So not only is there a risk of potential increases in that number, there is also a risk that government will change the rules and we could see a reduction in that number. So I think if the rules don't change, I would expect to see an increase, but I can't guarantee at the moment the rules won't change.
Councillor Thomas, I think you indicated what it's been.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rodney, for your presentation tonight. Potentially a silly question, but so by all means shoot me down. The word inflation or inflationary is mentioned in here a few times, and just looking at the ONS site tonight before the meeting, just where inflation was. So in February, for example, when this was discussed, inflation was 8.9%. At election time, it was 7.9%, and during the excitement in September last year, it was already at 8.8%. I was just wondering whether was there anything more discussed or added or taken into account that perhaps these estimations for inflations might have been a bit soft. But in fact, inflation wasn't heading that way, as you put between 4 and 6.5%. I was just wondering if should we maybe put a higher number on that, perhaps, looking where things have been.
So are you referring to the estimate now or the estimate that's made in February? I think with hindsight, yes, it probably was a low estimate, but there's always a range of inflationary estimates. And you could say actually at the moment, even 6.5% at the moment is low. But you will quite often find that, particularly staff pay at the moment, you'll see that actually staff pay is normally coming out below the actual headline level of inflation. So it's not necessarily that actually the headline rate of inflation that we face will be exactly the same as sort of the government's metrics. So it is a judgment call, and there'll always be a range of factors you can make. And indeed, I think that's one of the reasons why we need, when we're setting the budgets, to consider some of these variables as well. So you're not just saying actually, let's assume it's 3%, 6%, but what would it affect us if actually it was an extra percent higher, or what would happen if it's 3% higher? So it's trying to make sure that we've got a range of estimates, because an estimate is only an estimate. It will be wrong, and that's the only thing you can guarantee, that it will be wrong. So actually, but it's important to know if we are wrong, what would be the effect of that change. And we did, in that February budget report, indicate actually some of these scenarios were actually what would happen if the inflation rate was different to what was estimated.
Councillor Wymark.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 15, 1.7, it says obviously we're always looking to either deliver efficiencies and or cut services. Obviously, we're not looking to cut services at all. So I would say that's something we would all probably agree that we should not be cutting services to our residents. But the other point is around increasing income. Well, obviously, we've got the Food Innovation Centre. Surely that should be producing some income at some point. But also Broadland growth as well. If we just build, obviously the vision is to build 100 houses a year. If we could build half of that, we could produce enough income, I would suggest, to bridge this gap anyway. And we could also look at other businesses too. So I just wondered if that had been taken into account, potential revenue from both of those, really. Thank you.
So income from actually renting property out, yes, where we know we've got the rental stream coming in, that's been factored in. Rental for Broadland growth, there are no current schemes actually being approved, so it would be not wise to include an estimate for income which hasn't been sort of signed off or approved, so they're not included. And agreed that actually it's the aspiration, I'm sure, of all members to actually deliver efficiencies and not cuts. But if you look at where some other authorities are at the moment and have been for a number of years, some other authorities are having to face cuts to their services in order to deliver a balanced budget. We hope never to get there, and I'm sure we're working with the Cabinet to make sure that actually they do whatever they can to deliver the best services at a good price for our residents.
Scanning. Caroline.
So can I just make it clear, are you recommending that we cut our capital programme, or are you saying we can afford it?
The current capital programme will use all your reserves up, so yes, it will need to be reviewed.
Thank you. I think, from my personal point of view, I used to be part of a ruling group in Norfolk District Council. I remember having a long meeting in 2006 with the head of finance then, when we were looking to set a budget, coming towards the end of the electoral cycle actually, and we were told we need to leave money in the system because we couldn't guarantee we were going to retain control the following year, which we were told that was good practice at the time. So it's a bit disappointing that to see that the 5.5 million, which is there, has essentially been earmarked, already been sort of been cannibalised in the system. But that obviously, that, you know, your report makes clear that there are options which Cabinet and others will have to look at coming forward. And I mean, nobody wants to cut anything, but you cut your cloth according to your size, don't you? And it's not a perfect position, certainly as for any, I'll be, without putting up political colours on this, it's not a position that any party of any political colours would want to be having to deal with. I think we can all agree on that, but some decisions are going to have to be made. But so thank you, Rodney, for making that clear. The nature of this recommendation is pretty much to agree that today's Tuesday, because it's not something we have to sort of necessarily vote on in any technical detail, but we should take a vote on it because the recommendation is the Cabinet to endorse the latest version of the medium-term financial projections. So we're basically saying we agree that Rodney has given us a thorough report as he can do at this moment, and that we thank him very much for it. So on the basis of that recommendation, can we take a vote of those who agree to support that recommendation?
Two, 3, 4, 5, 12, and 13.
Sorry. You're doing like my class do occasionally. You go, is your hand up or not?
No, that's carried, Jim.
Yeah, that's carried. Was that unanimous? Thank you.
7, yeah.
Thank you very much, Rodney, for that. A lot of hard work done and a lot more to do, I would guess. We now move to agenda item, the next agenda item 8, the Housing Standards Enforcement Policy Review. And that will be led by Kevin Philcox.
Thank you, Chair, members. Everybody hear me okay? Fine, thank you. Thank you. Just a brief introduction to housing standards. Housing standards delivers a lot of services for the residents of Broadland. One of our primary concerns is the tenanted sector, where we have a range of powers to enforce standards for those residents who have problems with their properties. 221, we actually introduced an enforcement policy to bring all our practices together into one document and how we'd actually approach those. The document itself detailed that a review would take place, hence this report that you have. I expected the report just to be a relative endorsement of what we do, but having discussed it between team members, we could see areas for improvement and areas of weakness and where things have changed. And those are detailed mainly in the section 3 in the current and positions and findings, which go through to section 4 and proposed actions and how we'd actually address those issues. For example, one of the issues is a revision of our statement of principles for the smoke alarm regulations to actually bring a more accountable process to any fine we actually introduce, and another process to bring accountability for charging for notices, again, which has been a power. So that concludes down to recommendations to actually highlight those points and to actually provide, to make sure that we've got a more accountable service in the team, and we've got a revised document that we could rely on should we be tested in courts regarding any decision that we actually make. With that in mind, any question for anybody?
Not a problem. Thank you for that. Who would like to ask questions? I'm sure there'll be some questions around this. Must be such a thorough report. From my point of view, having gone through it earlier, I think this is eminently sensible. It just makes every part I was talking earlier with sort of a pre-meeting and anything which it deals with a lot of the safety issues, which this also deals with, and tidies up and makes clear where we stand. I think it's very, very good indeed. Given that no one's got any further questions, we've got one quick question. Councillor Temple.
Just reading through this, am I right in thinking you couldn't take action before where it involved damp, where damp was an issue? Is that correct, reading this?
No, we've always been able to take action regarding damp. The way the guidance is on damp, actually, when you actually assess a damp, it doesn't actually come out with a high grade. In light of recent issues, we've been requested by central government to actually increase our actions we can take. So previously, when you do a housing assessment, you have bands A to J, and A, B and C are classed as category 1 hazards where you have a duty to take enforcements. Below that, you have a power. So in our policy, we had a decision process where if we actually come across a D, which is a highest grade of category 2, we could take a power. Anything below that, it would need to be a collective. So what we've actually done is raise the stakes. So if it's an E for damp now, so if it comes out of an E, where previously we would need a collective defects of the property to take action, if there's an individual defect of damp of the property that comes out of an E, now within the policy guidelines, which we can defend now, because it's in the policy, we can actually take enforcement action regarding the damp and mould, if that's understandable.
Good, that's a positive change to see. That's put in the policy.
Yeah, I realised why. I suddenly thought to myself, I've done this report before, and then I realised, of course, I was sub at the meeting where this was previously discussed. So, and I remember actually that point being made, and just thinking it's ridiculous, given the news headlines about children and people dying from damp in properties, that under the Health and Safety Executive, or one of the conditions that have been laid out, that actually damp is not considered a serious enough offence to be classed as a high risk. So by us amending our policy, we can now treat it as a higher risk than was previously. So we have to be explicit about putting that into this. Thank you. I think if no one else wants to say anything, I think we'll take this to the vote. All the recommendations are there. I can read them all out if you want, and I can read out the pages for you to look at them at. But given everyone seems fit, would anybody like me to go through it in detail, or are we all happy to take this on block? Okay, I would accept that we take the recommendations on block. All those in favour?
And that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Not quite sure why I switched off the microphone. We now move on to my favourite part of any meeting, which is the exclusion of the press and the public. I'll give it a few seconds. I've been told that apparently YouTube doesn't switch off sometimes for a while, so I'll pause saying everything. But I have to still read it out. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business, because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act of 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access to Information